I was wondering, is fear dangerous?
I think that's a good question. I think that's the question we should talk about today. My name is Brendan McNamara,
And my name is Andy Swindler.
and this is Totally Classic, where every time we get together to record, we ask a question and do our best to question and answer that question. And we hope you find our conversation not only entertaining, but germane to your own thinking. Because we all need each other. And thinking isn't always easy, especially when, I don't know, you're afraid.
Yeah, we are animals in so many ways, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. Um,
Stupid animals.
like, ugh, we have to carry around all this fear biology. Meh. No, it's quite useful. Um, it probably is obvious to most of us how it keeps us alive in really dangerous situations. But arguably, it's really the emotion that even just reminds us to look both ways before we cross the street.
Yeah, the
Or
first
maybe
year,
one way if it's a one way.
maybe one way, or maybe we forget because it's so programmed within us. They're like, I'm sure I probably did that. Like when you walk out of the house and you're like, I'm sure I grabbed my keys. I don't remember doing it, but it's programmed in. Nope, didn't do it. Used my credit card to break back into my house. The first year I went to Burning Man the theme was hope and fear. And at the time I was like, oh, cool. I have too much stuff to buy. I'm not thinking about the theme. But later, especially because I put it on a patch on my Utilikilt, which I would wear from time to time. It's on my jacket now. I got a patch leaving, like in the 6 hour plus traffic jam as you get out of leave the playa. I finally started thinking about it then. And I thought about it throughout the week. I think it's a nice thing about having a themed event, especially of that sort of depth and demand, is that it's almost like taking on a very brief mantra, or like you were talking about, you keep running into fear and people talking about fear, and whether it was, what would you call it? Not confirmation bias. You had a good phrase for it.
Selective perception.
Selective perception. I always call it
I learned that at Northwestern.
Nice. Shout out Wildcats. I always call it, well, not always call it, ever since I learned the name for it, that it's Bader-Meinhof effect, which is like blue. Someone explained it. I never called it blue car, but there's a movie called Blue Car Syndrome, where you buy a blue car, then you start seeing blue cars everywhere. But Bader-Meinhof effect is I don't know who Bader or Meinhof was, or it was someone with a multi-hyphenate, but the effect of noting something again and again, but having hope and fear.
Bernie Madoff?
Bernie Madoff? It's like, you know what? So pyramid scheme, but he also, was a canny psychologist who's contributed to our perceptual sense in human history. So shout out. Is he still in jail? Who knows? But having something like hope and fear, it meant throughout the week, like when I hit points of like indeterminate outcome as to my own even will and disposition, then I would kind of return to that theme, almost like, well, is that going to clue me in? Is hope and fear going to clue me in? And one of the things I didn't like about it was fear, and I think is actually straight up wrong over time. I was like, if anyone ever asks about the patch, I like having preset, maybe it's a little autistic, but I like having preset things to talk to human beings about. So, when they reference this, that can introduce this anecdote. It's almost like designing myself as a non-playable character. But since I still have the patch on, whenever anyone brings that up, I'm always like, oh, good, we can talk about hope and fear. Because I find small talk difficult, but hope and fear would be an interesting conversation. But I find hope and fear aren't opposites. Like, I actually feel like fear, in the best sense, like activates something in you, and then your response to it can still be fearful and hopeful. Like they certainly, and maybe that's what they were saying. It's a duality that plays with each other. They're constantly cohabiting. But I was like, hope and fear, maybe they kind of presented them as opposites in their presentation statement. But I like fear. I think it's useful. I think it's too often derided as a negative emotion, and that's not right.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't really like to classify emotions as positive and negative.
Yeah,
it's more useful to just hold them as as they are. Because I think if you attach, that might lead to shame. If it's like we attach shame to any emotion that we're not supposed to feel, then I don't know.
Yeah.
Just compound things. Now that said, as we've talked about rather extensively on the show, the impact of an emotion that's especially not regulated,
Yeah.
that can certainly have negative consequences for ourselves and other people.
Yeah. All of them.
I thought I would read a brief bit from my sister-in-law's book. Katie Swindler wrote a book called Life and Death Design. She is a user experience expert and, fascinated in some of the same areas about the human condition and physiology and emotional response, but looking at it through the lens of how can designers design better interfaces and machines and contraptions and things to work with humans. And she pulls a lot of really extreme examples of, like maybe how the cockpit of a fighter jet is designed and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
And yet it's very relatable. And I think obviously good for designers, but at the end of the day, I really think just about anybody can benefit from this, because I think the more all of us understand about this biology and how it shows up, and the more we can just catch that in the moment and regulate it, the better off we'll all be. So I'll just read this one piece about the startle reflex. And this is just generally in the whole first section, talking about the stress response, the human stress response. But I think this summarizes it pretty well. When a sudden threat is perceived, the startle reflex is sometimes triggered, causing the body to move suddenly to protect itself. This subconscious reflex is triggered by a signal sent directly from the sensory thalamus to the amygdala, allowing the person to react faster than conscious thought. While the reflex is helpful in responding to the type of straightforward physical dangers that threatened our ancient ancestors, it is often less beneficial when dealing with the complex dangers of modern life. And I can't remember if she uses this example, but I once heard of one anybody who drives can relate to, which is just simply somebody puts on their brakes ahead of you. And, really anytime you see brakes ahead of you, the instinct is to also brake, so we don't, for the fear of smashing into the car ahead of us. And that's exaggerated, obviously, if it's very sudden. And maybe we're going at high speeds and all of a sudden, oh God, and you don't really have time to think, is I think Katie's point, and say, well, gee, how should I deal with this situation? I don't know, maybe we'll have a little committee meeting with the people in the car and come to a consensus vote on, whether or not we should swerve or stop or.
We got to get into the research. Like, let's look at how often braking too fast can lead to rear collisions from people behind you versus, and look, gauging your speed. There's no time. But this does make me wonder immediately, because I immediately thought, my stepdad and me, of myself, let's get Freudian about it. Tell me about your father. I know it'd be mother in the classic trope. I'm playing with that trope. But my stepdad is a notorious, quote unquote, late breaker, meaning like when people kind of pull in front of him slowly, he won't necessarily slow down. If people brake, if he doesn't know why they're braking, he won't necessarily brake. And I have a little bit of that instinct myself, where if someone's braking for no reason, my instinct pretty immediately is to kind of go around them. And my very first unthinking instinct is not to recognize their action as valid, which is interesting considering conversations we've had. That's why I was like, I should bring this up, because this kind of ties into something I'm continually examining and we've examined together. So I think that's a fascinating thing. I wish everyone I knew, this should be the new personality test, is to engage people in a series of frightening scenarios and sudden scenarios, especially, and see kind of and get a sense of okay, here's your pattern. Again, there doesn't need to be any explicit judgment on that, of whether someone breaks, you immediately brake. Someone forms a queue, you step in the queue. Someone breaks, you immediately drive around them. That's fine. We don't know. Literally, because we're talking about, in this case, I think with much fear, it's about the unknown. I don't know why that person braked. like slam their brakes on. They might have slammed their brakes on because they dumped hot coffee on them, in which case my braking is actually just exacerbating the problem they've created, and going. But if they were suddenly braking because a child ran out in front of them, me driving around them would potentially kill that child or that squirrel. You know what I mean? Like this is the constant. And this is something why I love rigorously exploring things, is I was like, oh, let's clear out all the unknowns that we have, because life is filled with so many unknowns. But the braking one is it's a good usage, because it is evaluative, rapidly evaluative, and we all have different instincts. And all those instincts are helpful in a community. Like I think it would be really bad if we all had the same. Well, I guess if we all had 100% the same instinct, maybe it would be helpful. If someone breaks and you break and everyone breaks. But that doesn't sound like a fun world to live in. That's like that's kind of step 40 or program. Basically, if we functioned as robots. And it might be helpful in terms of traffic if all cars were auto driving and all had the exact same programming. That we probably could avoid a great deal more accidents. But the joy of driving is lost.
I want to address that, but first, just to finish my plug for Katie's book.
Yeah,
you will find it on Rosenfeld Press, I believe, Rosenfeld Media, rather, lifeanddeathdesign.com. And the book is Life and Death Design. And the quote I pulled was from page 42, which is, as we all know, the best number. So, yeah, I love that idea. Even just the braking example, of course, limited to people who drive, but that's pretty fascinating. One thing that I almost always look in my rearview mirror when braking suddenly.
Yeah,
that's become my instinct, because I have been rear-ended at least twice.
Oh wow. Yeah.
No, I was actually in an accident a couple of years ago, and I finally went to the chiropractor for the first time, and he's like, so how many accidents have you been in? I'm like adding them up since high school. I'm like, 7, I think. And he's like, oh
wow,
that's kind of a lot. And I'm like, is it?
Is?
And I'm like,
I know.
maybe half of them are my fault. I don't know, but
well, this is the funny thing. All of them. Every accident is like a majority fault situation, really. Some you're like, oh, it's just unavoidable. You're like, well, technically, if when someone was going to T-bone you, you recognized it, instantly floored it, did some deft maneuver, it's technically possible. But there's plenty of majority fault accidents. But I think it's important, I say this out loud, this is helpful for me too, that there's some degree of mutuality in most even disastrous scenarios. Even if, again, if it's clear majority, and you can definitely identify who needs to apologize or whose fault it is and that sort of thing. But there's always something of like, well, you could have avoided it. I know there's some victim blaming in there, but you don't blame the victim fundamentally, but you still, as a victim of anything, you still go, well, next time I can do this thing differently, which might alter the outcome.
Yeah. Even in a case where the one I was like sitting at a stoplight and somebody just didn't just smash right into me.
Just kept on going.
And even in that scenario, I agree with you. I would say, well, I chose to be there at that moment in time.
Yeah, and not drive.
I had some culpability in.
Yeah. If you had just driven, swerving through the stop sign, they wouldn't be able to hit you because you would have been moving. But it's simply unreasonable.
Yes, it's unreasonable, and I didn't decline his insurance paying for my repair.
I certainly would not either.
And I don't know. There's a piece of that too, of just this idea of how we're all linked, and what is a big part of my path of just like the path of empathy. He was a dad and had just picked up, fast food for his family, and I make up a lot of stories. We chatted for a little while, but I don't know. It was kind of late at night. I'm like, wow, okay, he spaced out.
Yeah, we've all done it.
Exactly.
I think we've all done it at some point. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable assumption. And it just so happened that this was a really bad time for him to do that.
Yes. Yeah. I've definitely done it. I've driven through stop signs and no one was around, and kind of only part the way through the intersection, I was like, oh
Yeah.
oh, and you have
Oh,
that sense, you're
100%.
like, that was one of those moments. Like this could have been gone terribly wrong. It's good to recognize those. I think it's some good that speaking of, that's like good to have. I think that's a helpful, maybe a fear response is when you have a fear response of a disaster averted. I think those are the best. You're like, oh my gosh. And my brain always like locks onto those like a freak of like, I've got to learn. I've got to learn from this. This is the thing that's going to save me next time. It may not save me, but if nothing else, want to, it's like you want to force program your brain to recognize that which creates disaster before it creates disaster. Even though I think generally humans we kind of require the disaster. It's like, it's certainly our best path of learning is actual like damage.
Oh yeah, that's gonna get those neural
It's gonna,
pathways grooved
yeah,
right down. Yeah.
yeah, for better or worse, but I definitely think it helps. I mean, it's like right with parenting, people are always like, well, they're gonna have to make those mistakes for themselves. You're like, but why? And it's not completely true. I think there are patterns, and there are patterns of I've been taught that have saved me from disasters I've watched other people plow right into, or even just being around other people can be like, oh, cool. I don't want to whatever do cocaine, for example.
It's highly overrated.
That's what I've gathered. Again, I had to ask a lot of people. I was like, because it sounds fun, but I was like, oh, it's short. Ugh. And then having seen people like, kind of not quite destroy their life, but somewhat destroy or ruin portions of their life, you're like, oh, that's helpful. So I really appreciate, people who go off the reservation in all manner and leave the place of safety. You're like, oh, those are cautionary tales are actually very helpful, even in one's own life.
I'm not sure if we're supposed to go off the reservation. I'll look into that later.
And as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, I wonder if that's one of those phrases. And I was like, oh, it sounds good. I mean, I thought it was a restaurant term. You can't just go when you don't have a reservation. Plenty of places don't accept walk-ins anymore. It happened last night.
They're like, Kaboom's not a real name. I'm off the reservation.
Yeah, exactly. You're off. This can't be real. This is someone's trying to troll us and put us out of business. One thing I've noticed, especially in the past 2+ years, a lot of people have talked about it. I've indulged in conversations with it online, is that the past 2 years have been taking a lot of these theories into powerful practice, where I would suggest still in the middle of, but hopefully kind of in the waning year or year plus of the pandemic, which I think principally was not a viral pandemic, but a pandemic of fear. And watching people, and this is one of the wild things. This is, and when she was talking about the complex dangers to return to Katie's Mrs. Swindler's quote, that the complex dangers of life, many of which do not exist, or many of which are irrelevant, because I think we're in a culture presently where people kind of call things harm, call words violence, right? And if we're calling words violence, we have gotten so far afield from what fear responses are for. And I think it's going to take a couple of generations to reprogram what those words mean, or as a semantic conservative, we should just use those words for what they mean. But that generally the far greater danger was this sort of culture of panic and fear, where people start reacting in a continual basis. I mean, just for health outcomes alone, on an individual or social societal basis, but certainly on a way in terms of, like you're talking about, evaluating the situation, looking in their rear view. People got real afraid. And then I think the news business, especially, where I think it seemed, at least to me, maybe I started paying more attention to the news and noticed how many other people pay attention to the news business. But I think this is a pretty popularly noticed phenomenon, that the news thrives on fear, especially in the United States of America. We were something like 80%. We were 80% more negative than the baseline of negative news throughout the pandemic. Like, we were one of the most negative countries in terms of our news content throughout the pandemic. And I think generally, especially based on our societal ethos of independent thought, liberalism, classical liberalism, rationality, that sort of stuff, we reacted especially strangely based on how one might predict such a situation to go. So anyway, it's fascinating. It was fascinating to me how far away we are from recognizing actual danger. And so
Yeah.
we respond to things that aren't dangerous as though they are a wolf, wolves don't actually attack people. A bear. I don't want to badmouth wolves.
Yeah, it's like the other day somebody was saying, yeah, this whole like alpha male like wolf pack thing, like that's not actually how wolves lead. And like we projected all this crap onto these poor animals. And
Their fault.
I actually, so you bring up, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Kitty uses an example of a car accident.
Yeah.
And it's not like, braking in front of you, but I think it's somebody like swerving to the lane, or there's an object. And so this woman's fear response is to swerve to avoid it. But in that moment, the fear response is not permitting her, the space or time or wherewithal to check the other lane she's swerving into.
Yeah.
So she essentially swerves into another car.
Yeah.
And then it turns out, I believe in that exercise, that like the thing she was swerving against turned out not to be a big deal. Either it was a benign object, or it was a car that looked like it was coming into her lane, but it really wasn't, or something like that. So it's right on the money of what you're talking about in terms of when does the fear response, the startle reflex, actually make the situation worse? When is that, when you could objectively really look at, in hindsight, looking at the videotape for you kiddos. When could it be clearly seen that it was actually the fear response that caused the harm? And then in that case, I believe the answer to today's question is yes. Fear is dangerous.
I mean, I think fear is explicitly dangerous. Like it's really to kind of, it is a danger response at its most fundamental. It's survival response. And it's, unregulated, it's absolutely dangerous. And then even in and of itself, like it can be preservative, but I don't think it's like, especially fear responses or strong fear responses aren't phenomenally healthy for us. They can be neurologically healthy in that, like the increased neuroplasticity of like facing fear, that sort of thing, and then building in sort of like a dopamine, like training yourself towards the dopamine reward system for facing fear, that sort of thing. That basically being courageous. Like I say, one of the, I don't know if the Greek philosophers, marked it as such, but I think courage is a noble virtue, to be afraid of something and yet act in a way that is brave or beneficial. But fear is phenomenally dangerous. And I think this is if you can check the tape, check the playback, check the replay. This is why I've been continually fascinated. And I always love bringing up the pandemic, because we're in it, but we're also past like a big chunk of it. So we have like years now of data of like what a mass hysteria, I would say a mass hysteric response or a mass fear response is like to like COVID, right? Let's just say it's COVID-19, meaning an infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So for example, just this week, I haven't done this too often on the show. This is fun for me. So Dr. John Ioannidis, who is a highly regarded scientist, especially examining like data presentation. So he's in many ways throughout his career, he's been a scientist policing other scientists, and especially focused on quality of data and bias in data and that sort of thing, and widely recognized as such. So he just published a new study. It's in preprint, y'all. But it looked at the pre-vaccination IFR, which is the infection fatality rate for SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. The median IFR for 0 to 19 years old was 0.0003%. The global pre-vaccination IFR may have been as low as 0.03 or 0.07 in 0 to 59 and 0 to 69-year-old people, respectively. So that means that is and just to put that in perspective, that is about 100 times lower than estimates in like March and April by like WHO. There was early paranoia that it was closer to like 4% fatality rate, meaning if you got COVID, you had like a 4%, up to a 4% chance of dying. Now,
You mean March, April of 2020, like at the very beginning?
yeah,
Yeah.
like, yeah. Now, even at the time, that was not necessarily completely supported by data. That was like very limited data selection bias going on. I only started looking into it, but I looked back on it at the time. So I don't know how people arrived at that statement. But again, in a fear response, you kind of are trying to evaluate as fast as possible. So again, this is helpful for me to like look at it with empathy of like, wait, why did you swerve in the lane when it was just a cardboard box? But once it starts lasting for a long time, and we have an interesting, this is why I think the pandemic is so fascinating to observe fear through. There was no emergency to us, danger, like literally, especially once lockdowns happened, which was a inappropriate fear response that generally caused more harm than benefit, which we've seen in a multitude of fashions, including economic recession, but which is going to cause a lot more deaths. But most people I'm speaking to right now, I actually know probably a good 20% of my like friend groups who actually never stopped working, but I would still say the majority of people I knew anyway, stopped working and were locked down, sent home. Schools were closed, workplaces were closed, in which case you had tons of time to be like, hey, what's this object in the road? What's going on? But I think this is fascinating to me. This is almost like taking the car metaphor and being like, what if you were in the car and someone in the passenger seat who you implicitly viewed as some sort of authority figure screamed at you, get out of the lane, especially, let's say, on a daily basis, get out of the lane. That's a cardboard box. If you hit that cardboard box, people are dying. People are dying. You know what I mean? So if someone is constantly screaming at you, in some ways, I don't even know if it's a fear response anymore, or is it just like, I literally don't know neurologically, like, because it's certainly not the startle response anymore. Like that's but it is like in some ways, I feel like this is super smart in terms of driving clicks and views and advertising. And I know advertising is generally built on fear. Like it's almost taking the startle response and grabbing hold of it and being like, hey, let's ride this out. Let's roll with this as long as we can, as a way. And it's great, again, for capitalist purposes. It's super smart, super savvy. And I know especially Katie works on user interface, which I guess in many ways is grabbing, and I know social media algorithms are built in the same way of like, ooh, grabbing onto whatever your strongest response is. And then especially your strongest tendencies of response, which is like where your dopamine addiction comes in, and kind of dragging that on as long as possible until basically the pandemic didn't end. People just got exhausted and people just literally gave up. And the people like, I guess the pandemic's over. They're like, nope, there's still a big old cardboard thing in the road. But we're just like, I can't do it anymore. Which like, it's fascinating to me, the idea of like how long it took to exhaust, but on a social level, like a society-wide level, how long it took to exhaust people's sort of extended fear response.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we've addressed this in some ways, that this pandemic of fear, as you named, I mean, that's still alive and well.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
continue to be exacerbated, manipulated.
Yeah.
I think we've known the science of that for a while. We've just gotten better at building technology for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and I actually, Katie goes into quite some depth about the physiology, but at a high level, we mentioned the amygdala, and then just the adrenaline. I mean, often adrenaline is released, cortisol, these chemicals that have their purpose. They can just shove us, right into action, and yet, if prolonged, like they're meant to be very short-term solutions. And then, run away from the danger. And then animals are so savvy about this. For the most part, the ear will like go behind a bush and like shake.
Yes.
And, I'm learning some things about trauma release, and it's just humming, shaking. Just, it doesn't have to be some, I don't know, advanced technique. Just, I sometimes just do that intuitively. But but I have to kind of remind myself to do it. It's not an instinctual practice. It's like,
No.
oh yeah, like this thing. Because I think sometimes, like I was just in Palestine and we toured a refugee camp in Bethlehem, and I wouldn't say it was an acutely traumatic experience. In fact, it was amazing because we visited the sister of one of the people we knew who lived there, and she served us makluba, and it was an absolutely amazing hospitality. And yet at the same time, like I'm absorbing this situation.
Yeah.
It's not an acute thing, but there's just a lot there. And I was thinking afterwards, like, oh gee, that would have been a good opportunity to shake a little bit or something. And I think whether even that may be an extreme example for a lot of us. But I think that's part of the challenge, is it's not always like a near auto accident or something like that.
No, it's trauma of any absorption, I guess, of any of danger. I mean, it's a danger. You're like, this is dangerous. This is not and not even danger. Anything like that I would say fundamentally reveals the brokenness of the world.
Yeah, there you go. So that's what I saw.
That's a
deep
lot.
dive into the brokenness of the world.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I think something we're both super sensitive to is just how this shows up in social media. And right, like, I mean, it's funny, like if we can abstract ourselves and think at the end of the day, we're literally just staring at a little computer with some words on it, and all of a sudden all those chemicals are alive for me, and I'm freaking out, and probably adding to the fire, throwing a few logs onto the fire. And one thing I've heard, and I want to look more into this idea actually, but adrenal fatigue. So when you're talking about fatigue from the pandemic, I mean, how much of it is that like this all near constant supply of adrenaline and other
it's exhausting
and stress chemicals that are just like, oh my God. And I heard this once a few years ago. I was actually giving a workshop, and again, I think we know by now on the show, I hear things and then that sort of sticks with me, and then maybe Brendan will research it. But
let me fact check you, Andy.
But this I don't know, this made sense to me, I guess, from what I know of the amygdala and how much work it does to be the traffic cop in our brain of whether or not things deserve a fear response. That in highly in situations maybe where somebody is underprivileged, marginalized, living in economic scarcity, food scarcity, a lot of that just constantly, that they have done studies apparently where their amygdalas are enlarged, they're engorged. And I'm curious.
Inflammation.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't know enough about the amygdala to know whether like inflammation would restrict the fluidity of its operating procedures, but my assumption would be that it would. Well, yeah, and it's interesting too to note from my own experience, and then I think really watching, I was like, this behavior manifests as there's an addiction to fear. Like we're all adrenaline junkies, fear seekers, or fear avoiders, adrenaline avoiders to a degree of like pathologically harmful socially. For ourselves as individuals, but even like the society at large. Noticing in myself, especially, that I am in a sort of, I have been, I would say, for a number of years because of my autoimmune condition, in a sort of chronic fatigue state. But I have, and I struggle with, dopamine addiction, because we all do, but it's literally, it's the addiction that drives us in a lot of ways, but brain-wise, but even an adrenaline addiction. Because adrenaline I can't drink caffeine. I shouldn't have too much sugar. My body has difficulty processing calories. But even in my depleted state, if I can generate a little bit of that, if I can find ways to generate a little of that stimulation of fear response, and then purpose-based facing of fear, which I think then enlivens my sense of like, whatever the teleology, purpose self, like purpose-driven action in a state of fear. So then I'm being courageous, which is in life, like that's a dopamine freaking factory for me personally. And then also have the adrenaline of in being in an anxious or fearful state, drawing near things that make me afraid, or things that are even just I can evaluate as dangerous. Then that can be addictive. And then therefore, when people try to take that away from me, I respond like a flipping fiend. And I've observed that in myself, certainly. And I've absolutely observed that in many, many, many people. And something we've talked about too, that like when you then, even if you try to talk people out of that which they've been afraid of, like if people are listening and they heard me say what the IFR for COVID is, I guarantee somebody responded with a, no, well, no, that's not, like someone responded in it would trigger a response of denial of just observe statistics. Could be right, could be wrong. Be like, we should just regard that with curiosity, right? It's not dangerous to literally read a study that evaluated pre-vaccination IFR from a 2-year zoom out vantage point by one of the most well-respected, scientists policing quality evidence. I was like, oh, okay, you should just be like, oh, maybe that is true. Oh, I wonder why other things went wrong. But I guarantee, because I've seen this over and over again, when I share things with people, they respond as though you're about to take away their favorite toy. So I think we love, and I think we're in I'd love to try to figure this out, like why we as a society are especially primed to love that sense of aliveness. And my first thesis would be virtuality. We have such a virtual existence that inures us to actual like drama of life, and I think we're actually designed to have a certain amount of drama of life, not as much as we do though, but we have it in these weird little low-level virtual blips. And so, but then you crave craving something. And the intensity, maybe I do, especially, so I recognize it in myself, that I crave intensity of feeling. Like I adore it. It's so delightful and fun. And it feels like that's what life is for. Even when you were talking about shaking from trauma, I was like, well, that's what dancing is for. That's why dancing, you have to dance even in times of trauma or mourning. And that's why you play music. You should play music and dance at funerals. We have to, we physiologically know we need to shake this stuff out,
Yeah.
Again, I'm looking to dance hard. I was like, cool, how do I do something hard out of that?
And as you know, this is really alive for me. I'm really embroiled in that exact situation where I raised something, and I use slightly incendiary language, I think slightly, and yet I think accurate, with a group I'm involved with regarding the pandemic and the vaccine mandates and the impact that's had on not only inventing a class of people in the last 2 years, but then creating exclusions around it. You had
which is it's a clear indication, I think, of a trauma response, right? I think anytime we act contrary to the way that we have sort of established for ourselves to act by ethos or habit, I think that's it's again, anytime you're triggered, right? What's going on here? That's not you. I don't know. You shouldn't say it's not normal because human beings do that, but that's not typical for you. Why would you be into that? Or why would you respond that way? That's not, like, anytime we have an atypical response, it can be such a massive teacher, either in terms of, oh, you had an atypical response that was contrary to your very ethos or harmful to others or whatever. And then sometimes you can have a atypical response that's the opposite. It's like, oh, that was an atypical response. Good job. Right? Constantly. I mean, the reward punishment of like acknowledging and evaluating and assessing and putting things in different bins of like, oh, how on target or off target that was. I think the reaction itself, like the styles of reaction themselves are very revelatory.
Absolutely. And in this particular situation, to be a little more specific, there was an event here in Chicago that otherwise I looked like a great event, but the place that was hosting it required vaccine proof of vaccination, which kind of feels old-fashioned at this point under any circumstances. Even pro-vax people, for the most part, like, I don't know, like I don't see masks that much. It feels strange now, like to go to a place where it's like, oh, we need you to wear a mask, or we have to see your vaccine card. It's like, that just feels, like I think I have more empathy for people who were thinking that 6 months ago. And maybe that's selfish because I've been deep in this journey, particularly with you.
Yeah.
And I've shifted and I think some of my discovery this week is like, oh, like, why am I impatient now? Why am I not having as much empathy? And so I think on all aspects of this stuff, I mean, I think it goes back to a dopamine addiction to being right.
Yeah.
I think those are connected, and it feels good to be right, and it feels, I don't know, arguably usually maybe feels bad to be wrong, but it certainly feels bad to be shamed for being wrong. And I think that's a lot of what this is happening here. So in response to that event, I said, hey, the event looks great other than the vaccine segregation.
Yeah.
And that was not taken well. And I think the response was that I was using that as an inflammatory phrase.
Interesting.
I was attempting to just use it as an accurate phrase, although as a kind of shortcut. I mean, it is a punchy statement, I suppose, especially in the group. It's an activist group. But the response was fascinating, as you know, because it like even the email subject that came to sort of urgently address first there was this, like, which I actually never gotten to the bottom of, this request or this need that was stated to like urgently address this, which until I learn more, I can only interpret as like, wow, we've got to set Andy straight. Like this. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe the best interpretation would be like, oh, let's get super curious and like dig into this and like see all sides and have a dialogue, and then maybe come to some kind of group consensus about how we feel about this stuff. But that's not at all the tone of it, because this email chain that was then started with the subject responding to anti-vax rhetoric.
Which is wild.
And even just that container is like,
you're like, hold on a second.
And you've got the initial thing, which I do give credit for a framework that at least created the foundation for here's what I'm basing this on. Here's an article from the CDC that I'm basing this on. If you think something different, please provide your evidence. I'm like, okay, that's a framework.
Framework, at least the framework for dialogue.
But then it became, and I think mostly we've been talking about kind of individual psychology and physiology, and then we kind of expanded way out to the pandemic. But there's this place in the middle of the group or tribe or cult dynamic. And I've seen it show up a couple different ways. One is like when one person with a lot of voice or power can kind of override, or like really create a new truth. Like when they just even maybe say like, oh, this is what happened. That suddenly becomes the new truth or a new thing. And then the other part is like the pylon, when either people agree with that person or maybe feel like they need to defend that person. Reason, which again, in this case is totally bizarre because I didn't address it to anybody specifically. Like, but the fear response, in all likelihood, coming back to what you were just saying, is people are like, oh my God, this is in such dire contrast to what I believe is true scientifically about the vaccine. And now you've introduced this massive cognitive dissonance with the idea that maybe the way we're handling the vaccine is not doing what they think it is, which is making people safer. But actually potentially harming people. Let's say at best there's a neutrality to it. But in all those circumstances, then how do we justify, creating the ethics of exclusion, right?
Well, it becomes almost a comprehensive examination, to go back to the car of, hey, we keep swerving into other cars. Like, let's stop crashing. What do you mean crashing? Well, we're clearly avoiding the box. We don't know what's in the box, right? So either if you don't know, you just be like, it could be a bunch of puppies. I'm not killing a bunch of puppies, you maniac. You're like, yeah, but we keep crashing into cars. So let's, you know what I mean? It would be, now obviously in a fully like tense instant sense, then a strong reaction would make sense, right? If you're yelling at someone for crashing into cars when they keep trying to avoid bombs or whatever, you know what I mean? If it's like you're in War of the Worlds or something, you're driving, things are being bombed, and you're like, you don't yell at the person who's doing whatever they can. But in a place of calm, that to me is always fascinating, when people jerk into a fear danger response. I found especially interesting, like with your case, unrelated to actual individual trauma, meaning this is like so many degrees removed from anything anyone's even dealt. Like, what are they being triggered about? It really is just like a thought. And this is, I think, the danger, this whole danger of like the dangers of the modern world, where it's just like people view, I think generally, or even have maybe even have a very such a similar physiological responses, it's very difficult to not view it as such, to cognitive dissonance, for example, as like a start. It produces that startle effect. Like if you're startled by something that you haven't seen before. And I'm an intensely curious person, so I don't really know % how that happens, like why that would happen. Like I've certainly been startled, but the startle effect lasts, I mean, it's so short, dude. The startle response is less than 4 seconds. I've only had one in my entire life. Like, I've been surprised and shocked by things, obviously. I've had people pull out in front of me suddenly, right, in fast pace. I've had people wait behind a door in a dark room and frighten me with their voices, and I've done it to many other people, and I find it hilarious. My wife does not like it at all. She's cried the last 2 times I do it, so I haven't been doing it as much. I laugh out of being startled. I usually get and I laugh, like I have a laugh response, a shaking laugh response, because I do like I like that feeling. But the only time I've ever had a genuine fear response, I was in the wilderness reading a Bible. I fasted the wilderness for 40 days, 40 nights, and I was reading a Bible, leaning on a rock, and I heard that distinctive rattle of a rattlesnake. And then a rattlesnake, I would say at least like a 6-7 rattlesnakes get pretty darn big. It's like a 6 or 7 foot rattlesnake, very substantial, like very thick, not quite as thick as my wrist, that would be exaggerating, but thick. Literally was coming up the sort of rock face to my right towards me, which normally snakes don't always do. So I assume I must have been standing somewhere where perhaps it typically takes shade or once had a nest or whatever. I don't know. But it was coming towards me, which is flipping freaky. And so I turned, and it was maybe like, I don't know, it's probably less than 10 feet away. It's always hard to tell because in a sharp fear response, I do believe our senses are heightened. So my vision might have like clarified and made it feel closer, but it was close enough to me that I was like, oh my gosh, there's a rattlesnake literally coming for me. Now, of course, my mind didn't go, well, great. A rattlesnake can only strike as long as its body if it's coiled. If a rattlesnake's out flat, that was actually the perfect time. I could have just run over and stomped on its flipping head, completely dealt with the problem, because it was out straight, like it was winding up. I didn't think any of that through. I looked over, saw the rattlesnake, heard the rattle, looked at it, saw it coming towards me. I ran a good like 15 to 20 feet before I had a thought. Like I was already, I literally stopped 15 to 20 feet away and then was like, looked back, and I was like, my brain glitched. It felt like it felt like I blacked out. Like I barely remember moving. And I was like, that was the only like genuinely strong fear, like startle response I've ever had in my life. But since I have had a genuine startle response to a genuine danger, especially because I was out in the wilderness alone. So yes, if I got bit by a rattlesnake, I literally could die. But that's how quick it is in actual danger, meaning like when one is triggered by a cognitive dissonance to, let's say, a word use, a semantic phraseology, 15 seconds max of strong reaction. And maybe you start typing then, but after that, how is that response even happening? Unless it's been pathologized and justified or whatever, it becomes like a social, this is like the mass hysteria, mass formation psychosis thesis offered by a number of whatever social scientists and psychologists or whatever about the phenomena of the past couple of years. But that's what's especially fascinating, to relate actual danger and response to the circumstance that you're discussing.
And the rattlesnakes are, oh man, nobody wants to hang out with me.
I know. What's up? I was literally like, I was doing my calm rattle. That was the hey, just chill. We're chill here. We're totally chill. I'm not coiled up.
Well, you just reminded me something I try to hold on to is that on average, my understanding is that, our emotions will process through in about 60 or 90 seconds if we give them time and space,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
most
Attention.
of us don't
Attention.
or
Yeah.
don't have the opportunity. And this is, a lot of my works in sort of workplace dynamics. And
Yeah.
I think that's especially true in the workplace for all sorts of reasons. And even if there was a stated culture of sort of connection and care, do we trust it?
Yeah.
Or we're
Yeah.
kind of trained not to admit weakness in a lot of ways. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I know I'm going to tough it up and all this.
I got it. I got it.
It's like, no, just let it, God, I dream of a world where we could just be like, whoa, hey, everybody, I'm really having a thing here. Could we all just, kind of hum for maybe 2 minutes and be like,
Yeah.
whoa, like that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
One of the other pieces, it's funny, I wasn't consciously thinking of it when I chose my shirt today for Reptile Fest, but a lot of people refer to this part of
Yes.
the brain chemistry as the reptilian brain, and it's arguably the more primitive in terms of evolution. But it's funny, as you well know, I live with an iguana named Phaedrus for the last 23 years, so I feel like I've had a really up close and personal exploration and understanding. It's like deeply embodied, just how the reptilian brain works in that, at least in that one animal. And it's interesting because I mean, for the most part, she's very sedentary, like Wesley's just sitting in her basking spot, chilling. And yet I do see it. But I think I don't know, I always get a funny little defensiveness when I'm like, can't we call it something else? Like, why are we got to be down on reptiles?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's almost, to me, this does feel like the negative side of the fear response. And that's when people are talking about the reptilian brain. They're like,
Sure.
oh,
Sure.
it's this less evolved, like panic attack sort of brain, I'm like,
yeah. But I get it in that, but it isn't necessarily, even in the description, it's not actually negative. I know you feel defensive of Phaedrus, who's a gentle spirit, but it's just,
I have the scars to prove it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's the gentle. But no, it's just fundamental. Like it's a phenomenally fundamental response where it is, and I think, but okay, this heads towards.
But the reptile in your story seemed to be pretty fucking calm. That's all I gotta say.
It could, really, it could have been. But like it speaks, I think, to our desire. The negative tone that I think you feel off of it, which I don't think is inaccurate, is I think we have this longing for us to continually, like, quote unquote, evolve. So if that's older, that means worse. But if we held on to it in any way, then that actually means it was properly adaptive. And in some ways, it could be the truest part of ourselves. The weird thing is, I think we're very divided as a society. I think we're wrestling hard with this. Like, either our emotions are the truest thing in the world, or they're the thing that needs to eventually kind of be bred out of us. That we either need to be like, kind of let them have all the control, to which that are like emotion-driven thoughts or non-rational thoughts should drive reality. Again, this is what I've struggled with, that I think our society sort of chose in the past 2+ years, that we kind of chose as a society to generally regard our emotions as, we're emotional led. Like, we've not been evidence led, we've not been science led. We've been, as a populace, emotion led, and we just decide that's true. How I feel about this is the truest thing in the world. And I think there is another aspect of ourselves, maybe this is even our right and left hemisphere sort of like arguing it out, that suggests this old instinct of just like, just respond, is, we got to get rid of that. We got to stop at that, because that's all we're going to do, is then just back and forth forever.
Yeah,
we've got to breed it out with technology, even potentially.
I think to me, the place in between is regulation. Like, I'm having an emotional response. Do whatever I can. I don't know, breathe through that, hum through that, shake through that.
Yeah.
Be with others who can co-regulate, and then do something, right? That's the path through it. I think I'm more on the side of I mean, I relate feelings in a lot of ways to spirituality in the
No,
practice
interesting.
that I've had, and I know we are a little. I think we see that differently, and that may be a good discussion for the future.
Yeah, yeah.
But one, I guess to slightly expand on that, meaning that there's a feeling of being connected to some greater energy or power
Hmm.
or God, like, and so I think that can be quite tricky because I think, as we look at how all kinds of um I don't know, religions or spirituality or ethos of all kinds have been weaponized over time. I'm always curious. I think that's why I've gotten super curious about like pleasure chemicals. I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
which ones of those? I don't know. Could we remotely decide or define which of those are some kind of connection to higher consciousness or higher spirit, however you want to say that,
Hmm.
and which ones are really typically lead more to these like harmful reactions and then scale
Yeah,
up some of the things we're talking about.
yeah,
One thing
yeah.
I want to weave in briefly is just I also learned when I was studying mindfulness that I think this science has been pretty clear for a while, like that we make decisions from the emotional part of our brain, and and then we kind of back them up and
Mm.
rationalize them. And the example given at that time was that there was a study where there were people who had brain damage and it affected the emotional part of their brain,
Mm.
and they were given a choice between a black and blue pen, and it took them more than an hour to decide.
Mm.
So even the most simple decision is at least activating that part of
Yeah.
our brain.
Although that is for someone without emotional regulation, that is one of the hardest things to ask them to do. Because then it is, because who cares? Like that's who cares? That is almost explicitly a like an emotional attachment. Like I have a warm feeling towards black pens more than I do blue pens. A blue pen, I'm like, I have like a stronger disgust response, which probably filters more through. There's no value. I can't be like, well, because in the past, this one teacher who didn't like me. And so I've decided that I've evaluated that all people who are mean write with blue ink. So I don't want to be a mean person. You know what I mean? For me, it
I
is.
got an F when I used blue ink once, so I don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. It's not patterned on. Obviously, so that is, I just want to say for that experiment, that's a very difficult decision to make without emotion.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
I hadn't. I think you brought up that example before, and I'm glad you brought it up multiple times because I hadn't noticed that initially. I was like, oh, that does make sense. Like it would be hard, but I was like, no, that's a particularly hard question because there's no, as opposed to something like, hey, would you like to eat an apple or a donut right now? Because then you can go into like, oh, okay, well, I've already had some healthy food, blah, blah, you know what I mean? So I would go into my rational brain for that, as
because
opposed
there's
to,
no rational way to decide that black or blue ink is better,
yeah,
basically. Yeah.
yeah. Other than, I don't know. I mean, I love having rational arguments, and I could go ahead and that could be a debate club fun thing to do. But I don't know. Anyway, that's just fascinating. That's how those types of decisions it's fascinating to think about how much that is emotional in a quote unquote all things being equal scenario.
Yeah.
You go purely off emotion. And I think people try to create, actually, I think that happened with you. People try to create those scenarios, pretend those scenarios exist, that like all things being equal. People have done that with me, scientific conversations or whatever. You like show someone evidence because they're making a claim. And you're like, okay, well, let me defend my claim. And they're like, well, you know what? That's one study. Other studies say different things. You're like, okay, so all things are equal. Like that's your claim right now. It's blue ink and black ink. And I was like, show me one study. Let's just go back and forth until we run out, right? We could play this like a game of cards. Let's keep putting our cards on the table until we run out. And then it's like, okay, well, I have more studies than you. Now let's look at the quality of studies. This is a very easy thing to do rationally, but people go into I think this is, and to me, it's a good sign of people heading into an emotional state when we don't need to be led by emotions. But however, for your ethos personally, in some ways, you're like, if emotions are connected to source, divinity, like our spiritual selves, then you kind of want to keep those around, you know?
Right.
So that's fascinating. Well, and which I think, well, yeah, I think generally our perspectives on spiritual existence are almost explicitly contrary. Or if there's like a 1 and 2 of this arrangement, it's flipped upside down or whatever. That feelings are secondary, or feelings are, I think, in some ways, the pathway most intensely connected to ourselves.
Mm.
Like, just like to me, emotions and intuition to me are the least reliable methods of evaluating reality, but they're also I think they're the strongest in usness. You know what I mean? So for me, emotion would be probably the what is it, the fastest slide, or the shortest ladder to intensified pure connection to self, which would, but I think in your program that self and divinity may be connected concepts, whereas in my purview, self and divinity are explicitly separate until unified concepts.
Mhm.
I know I said it in a vague way, but
No, I do want to talk more about this in the future, because I there might be an alignment there that emotions are the accelerant or can be the strongest pathway. So that's, if I heard that right, I mean, that's a curiosity.
yeah, to you, to like knowing yourself.
Yes,
Yeah,
which then to me does relate to divinity.
yeah.
Gosh, you said something I wanted to respond to, and it's drifted away. So maybe I'll hopefully that'll come back. One story that's really alive for me. I've been getting into rock climbing in the last year and a half. I haven't in a while actually, but I do enjoy it. And there in rock climbing, there's the idea of belaying, which is somebody holding the rope essentially.
Yeah.
And I noticed if somebody's belaying or holding the rope, I like that for a lot of reasons. It just feels better to have somebody there. Like I can take a break halfway up if I need to.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's quite a bit of trust there, right? In terms of that person.
Yeah.
If I fall, it's really up to that person. And now there is some technology, right, that it'll lock.
Yes. Yeah.
It rips out. So I'm mostly relying on their weight and the physics of the pulley. Is that it?
Yeah.
To make sure that even if I'm heavier than them, that I'll still be held up. However, there's also this thing called the auto belay, which is this machine, and you just hook yourself in, and it's like I don't know, maybe a flywheel, some kind of spring, and as you go up, it's like a seatbelt. It just sort of stays with you and paces with me. And I don't mind that so much going up, and I'm not afraid of heights. Although my girlfriend now is, so that's actually been really interesting to look at her acrophobia. We looked it up. But the thing for me is when I get to the top of that climb, and this is an indoor climbing gym, I am terrified to jump off and allow that auto belay to let me down gently.
That's a huge trust fall, man. That's a big one.
It's big, and rationally, I keep thinking, oh, I should look into the company that makes those. I should look at their sort of safety record, and I'm sure they posted all kinds of yummy information about how safe that is, and I see when I get up there, I'm like, inspection date and all this stuff. And none of that matters. And so on the one hand, I love like having access to this so like self fear coaching.
Yeah.
I mean, really, if I do want to face fear more, I don't think I always do with courage. And I think this would be really a good kind of clean way to be in it, because I don't really think it's dangerous at all. I see my 11-year-old niece just getting to the top and jumping off like it's absolutely nothing.
She's going to heal way faster than you, man.
Right. So I almost feel like I want to do fear reps. I'm going to go to the gym and do fear reps. you know.
I mean, that's what a part of what I want this show to be for me and for you. And I'm sure it's slightly more uncomfortable for you. I'm assuming it is, because this is totally my happy place of like doing those fear things. I did the ice baths with my beloved a bunch of times. She loves it. I do not like it, but it is like overriding fear and just being like, your body's screaming at you, get out. No, don't, no. What are you doing? You're literally trying to kill us. You're trying to murder us. And you just go, no, it's not true. I can be here. And you shake and you breathe and you just go, all right, yeah, I'm just going to be here. I'm going to recognize it, see it for what it is. Again, it's all this acknowledgement facing, you don't even have to accept it. You know what I mean? I was like, in some ways I sort of deny my fear response. And I was like, well, you don't get to rule. You don't have to leave. Like, it's fine that you're here. Yes, if I fell into a plunging river in the wild by myself, I would want some part of me to be like, you should get out. But it's fascinating to like, it is a fascinating thing that I think, but I love it on a daily basis. I mean, this is why like I draw near people with like bitterly oppositional perspectives on the world than myself. And again, I'm acculturated to that again, as being like growing up in at least a Christian household. My dad was not a Christian. My mom is, but growing up in a Christian household, you're pretty like inoculated in some ways against like some of the level of stress response, and that you just sort of generally assume or assume once you've encountered time and time again that like when you present your worldview that people are like, that's stupid. so like you're like, all right, well, that's most of my existence. I better just go ahead and get used to that. But the belay thing was fascinating, where I was like, this is part of the manufactured fear response, as well as what I want to do on this show with you, is I was like, I trust you to belay me, that I can explore even recklessly. And I was like, all right, Andy's got me. And I hopefully I can belay you in the same way, that even if I'm messing around with the cord, that I'm like, well, I'm not gonna let you fall. You know what I mean? And I'm not here to let you fall. And I'm not here to like, I'm here to help you, and I'm here to be helped by you in pursuing this fear response. And what I see in the pandemic of fear was, again, by flipping March or April of 2020, people were already saying, if that person's not wearing a mask, they are not a person who will belay you. Same thing with the vaccination. The vaccination passports are not about public health protection. There's overwhelming consensus of evidence that it was not about that whatsoever. And there was no basis at the time cited. People weren't even saying, here's the evidence of why we're doing. So we have no reason to assume that people were doing something based on a public health basis. But what they were doing was saying, we don't want people in here who we don't trust to belay us. And if you don't get vaccinated, you're this kind of person. It's the same thing that happened with masks. And then it's the same thing we see with, I would say, the negative aspects of intersectional thought, or we see it with, certainly see it from the freaking Republicans telling you that Democrats are here to take your guns and kill you. And the Democrats telling you that Republicans are here to destroy democracy. And so they're basically saying, hey, look at all these identifiers that tell you you can't be belayed by that person. So in some ways, your group's response makes sense from that standpoint, if they've been convinced by their emotions, not their rationality, mind you, which is, I don't think, an appropriate way to evaluate such a claim, by someone authoritatively saying these things enough times that you just like, literally, it's a form of brainwashing. You just eventually like, well, I don't know. People keep saying it's got to be true. A stitch in time must save 9. I don't know. A penny saved must be a penny earned. You're just like, all right, I guess those things are true, until someone breaks the mold or whatever. But that they then, if you say a thing like that, all of a sudden they're like, wait, he's a non-belayer. We've been belaying with this guy, you know what I mean, this whole time, and he's not belaying us. Now, you've displayed no threat to them. You didn't even, to them, I guess you felt like you jiggled the rope or pretended to let go of it, even though nothing of the sort happened. You literally just said a thing. You know what I mean? You said words. And so in some ways that would explain their fear response, and explains what's so dangerous about fear, is once you have false paradigms of what is dangerous, then you get in that fear response when you're at the top. You're like, well, how do I trust fall? And how do I trust fall? How do I trust? And if I can't trust you, then in some ways you can actually, hopefully, maybe this will help you have a more, and me too, have more empathic reaction, or a more like, oh, okay, less defensive reaction. Not that defense is wrong, but just, less defensive reaction, meaning if that's what they felt, oh my gosh, wait, he shouldn't belay, I don't know if he can even belay us. then they're like, we better talk about this.
When what I'm
You-
really saying is,
Yeah.
oh my God, you all have been using frayed ropes. And I found a whole
Yeah.
box over here full of like much
Yeah.
better ropes.
Hey, let's use the good ropes, guys. They're like, what do you mean? These ropes are fine. What's wrong with you? You know, everyone's told us these ropes are fine. And you're like, oh, okay, well, let's talk about it.
Let's do some tension tests or something.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like this is interesting because I guess rationally or just fundamentally believe that diversity of ideology and the tension that I think just naturally comes from that is extraordinarily healthy and necessary.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
great.
for me, very uncomfortable. So I think that's a
Yeah.
difference between us, and yet here I want to keep inviting myself to that, and I do find it hard then to, if I find myself as the minority opinion, to be like, oh gosh, do I, pick this battle, so to speak, stick my neck out, because I think this group truth wrath is pretty common to the human condition, unfortunately.
Yes.
And I'm sure I've participated in it. And and I remember what I was going to ask earlier, which I think is related to this. Just I believe we are meaning making machines. That's thrown around a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm curious, I believe that meaning is usually based on emotion. And that maybe art is a good example. Like, how do we respond to art?
Oh, interesting.
Or purpose, or even, and in this case, I think that we could maybe say is, oh great, I react to art however you want. Feel like you said, feel things, live.
Yeah. Yep.
And yet maybe the danger zone is when it crosses into like that meaning becomes truth.
Yeah. My emotional response to this painting is what this painting is, and no one should say anything different.
And then it becomes so hard it becomes intractable. It becomes like it feels like a threat. I think, as you were just saying, it feels like a threat to question that truth, because now I'm emotionally attached to it.
Yeah, well, and it's a good thing, I think, for everyone to go ahead and check, because it's fascinating. Then why do you require someone else to we talked about this in the pronoun conversation. Why do you require someone else to validate what you know is true? If like someone can deny it, like, does that benefit you, like, in some way? And listen, I have to face this exact conversation as a Christian who is called to evangelize, which is to like talk about Jesus. Like, well, what does it matter whether anyone else like Jesus? Well, I'm like, well, of course it is fundamentally about a threat, a danger or a threat response, separation from God, eternal punishment. I'm not, at some points when I made it more about myself, I would be like, I would have emotional responses if it didn't work out well and the person didn't just believe in Jesus. But I'm not a child anymore. And so I'm like, well, it's not really up to me. That's like God working. God's going to work. I can just tell you a true thing. God's going to work. And actually it's just a lifetime of people denying it eventually, that I'm like, oh, all right, well, I'm here to tell people what my best estimation of what is true is. And if they accept it, fantastic. I'm excited to join them in that common place and become homogenous with them in the point of view on A, B, or C, whatever thing. But at the same time, if they deny it, it has no effect on me in terms of my perception of truth, and it doesn't diminish my status in any way. But we have that group, that homogeny, that tendency towards homogeny, again, as we've talked about, as a safety mechanism, meaning like, I need to be like them. So then when things go wrong, I can be defended by the group, or as things now are going wrong, I need to get with my group. But again, if we look to the sovereignty of self, and we look with greater, and this is why I think emotion is helpful, and what you would call spirituality, and I would just call like self-awareness or whatever, that like the more we know ourselves, the more immobile and not just immobile like static, but immobile in terms of our sense of self, that we're like, my emotion, someone might shame you for your emotional response. You're like, well, but this is my emotional response right now. So I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, I got to stop feeling this. Why are you getting so mad? Cut it out. Don't be such a jerk. You're like, well, no, I'm mad. So I'm going to examine my madness. I'm going to talk through it. I'll use reason to kind of evaluate whether it's a reasonable response or not. We can do that together if you want, but I'm not going to be like, oh no, I'm wrong. But I think a lot of we need to learn that. I think it needs to flip and be taught in schools, but the hardest part is I think schools in general, education is actually bent towards homogeny. So in some ways it would be encouraging disruptive behavior because everyone's going to regulate in different ways and everyone's going to respond in different ways. And having dealt with groups of children, I understand why you would not want them all to follow their instincts on a constant basis. So I recognize the pragmatism, teachers. I'm not coming down on you 100% for that. But
Yeah.
I think that's a commonality you and I share as well, which is like, what's going on with you and how neurotic do we need to be? I mean, I think having some degree of neuroticism, meaning if someone accuses you of something or responds a way to you, I don't think abject denial or trying to force someone out or like destroy them is a rational response, even intellectually or verbally. But we also don't need to be swayed by it. I think it's really finding that the calm center, even when you are in a maelstrom of being like, oh, I received that. Let me move that around myself. Let me see how that works, how that literally feels. Again, like art, how does that feel? What does it make me think? What does it remind me of? But like using all the capacities we have to just take things in. Take it in, man.
Just take it in. Yeah, the thing about homogeny is so important and astonishingly contradictory because it does. I mean, I think like however we might think a group is like us can feel safer.
Sure.
And yet, when we scale that up, I think one of the great challenges for our species is this lack of biodiversity. I mean, we're killing off all these species. The way we create our food is being radically homogenized, and it's not the way nature wants it, I think.
No, this is it's the anti-emotion streak in some ways. It's like, let's streamline it. Let's unnaturally perfect the system, which, hey, that's what vaccination is, right?
Right.
So those can be good, those can be healthy capacities, and those can be damaging capacities.
So I think in summary, something like fear in and of itself is not dangerous. I think we have 2 thumbs up on it is simply an emotion.
Is fear dangerous? Thumbs up. Is fear dangerous? Thumbs down.
It's an important one. How we react to that and how we could cause danger and harm based on how we react to fear may be extraordinarily dangerous. And I think we given a number of examples, both interpersonally and scaled up to maybe the whole world.
Maybe everything. Yeah, I would say fear is fear dangerous? No. Is false fear dangerous? Yes.
Mm.
And I think we're obsessed with false fear because we live in a phenomenally false world. And I mean that like in terms of it's not that interested in truth, but then B, like the increasing virtuality of existence makes us have. This is why I think like especially us, we grew up on video games, right? And then I'm about to launch into a batshit theory right before we sign off. But like we all grew up on video games. So then we've done this on words on a page too, or anyone telling a story or whatever. We project ourselves into that. But video games, most especially, we are in control of the avatar of ourselves. So especially for us, we grew up then Atari, Nintendo, whatever, placing ourselves in virtual avatars. Therefore, virtual experiences have meant something to us neurologically, physiologically, embodied, intellectually, emotionally, our entire lives. So now when things happen to us virtually, if someone says, like, writes you a mean email, even though it's separate, and the words is even different because, of course, we've been doing that as a species for a very long time. If someone wrote a negative letter to you, you would have an emotional response. You're like, this is an attack. It's words on a page, man. Yeah, but it's more concrete than spoken words. And so likewise, if that happens to our avatar selves, when we get attacked on social media, it's like, oh, you're attacking my virtual self, which is my real self. And that penetrates into the real world then, where you're like, if you attack my ideas, you're attacking me. That's like our ideation is our our imagination is our virtuality in many ways, right? So I don't know who said this, but I've heard it quoted a bunch of times recently where it says, what is it? Imagination is our tool to let our ideas die instead of us.
Mm.
So in some ways, there's ideas and sharing of ideas and discussion is literally invented for us to avoid danger.
Mm.
Diplomacy is built to avoid war. And I think we live in a place where fear based on like ideas alone without execution of ideas, right? Ideas can, when executed, can be harmful, but the ideas themselves are not explicit. We shouldn't be afraid of them, if nothing else. At some point, we can realize ideas are terrible and we destroy them, right? Kanye West like says, "Oh yes, I'm an anti-Semite," and we're like, "Oh, I don't know if I want that idea around. I'm okay with that being excluded from my space. I've heard all this stuff before." You know, maybe you have something new to say. I don't necessarily believe you should be censored for those beliefs or removed from social media platforms or whatever. But I understand as a society being like, nope, try that idea tons of times. Don't want it. Nope. So like we have to evaluate things. But anyway, I think that's the very dangerous part about fear as it's identified or clarified or regarded in our modern society.
Yeah, that's an interesting quote. Some language that came to me a few years ago, I think related, don't pour concrete over your stories. This calcification.
Yeah.
That I think is related to fear. Like it's a grip.
Yes. Oh, totally.
It's like, I can't. It's the fear death grip, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I know we need to wrap. I love you.
I love you.
I mostly don't fear you. And even when I do fear you, I love you through that.
I love you. And I thank you for being trustworthy in your belaying.